Deep in the endless void of space, far from any known star systems or mapped routes, floated a dark and ominous object. It was a ship, but not like any other ship anyone had ever seen. Its surface was black as night, absorbing even the faintest glimmers of light that dared to touch it. The vessel drifted silently through the emptiness, its jagged edges and broken hull giving it the appearance of something abandoned long ago. To those who might stumble across it, it seemed more like a ghost than a machine. On board the exploration cruiser Eclipse, Captain Laura Hayes stood on the bridge, staring out at the strange sight before her. Her crew bustled around her, checking instruments and reading data from their screens. The ship's sensors had picked up the mysterious object just moments earlier, and now everyone was trying to figure out what it was. No one spoke much. The mood was tense, almost fearful. There was something about the ship that made people uneasy, though no one could quite put their finger on why. "Lieutenant Brooks," Laura said, turning to a man sitting at one of the consoles. His name was Daniel Brooks, and he was the ship's engineer. He was a tall, wiry man with sharp features and a tendency to frown when he was deep in thought. "Can you tell me anything about this thing? Is it active?" Daniel studied his screen for a moment before shaking his head. "Not really, Captain. It's giving off some kind of energy signature, but it's irregular. Like it's flickering in and out. I've never seen anything like it." He paused, then added, "And there's no sign of life aboard, if there ever was." Laura nodded slowly. She didn't like the sound of that. Irregular energy signatures were never a good sign, especially out here where nothing should exist in the first place. Still, they couldn't just ignore it. The Eclipse was an exploration vessel after all. Its mission was to investigate the unknown, not turn away from it. "Prepare a boarding party," she ordered, her voice steady despite the unease growing inside her. "We need to find out what this is." A few minutes later, a small team gathered near the airlock. Alongside Daniel was Ensign Chloe Miller, a young woman with short brown hair and wide, curious eyes. Chloe had only been assigned to the Eclipse a few months ago, but she was eager to prove herself. This was exactly the kind of mission she'd dreamed of when she joined the fleet, dangerous, exciting, and full of mystery. As they suited up, whispers spread among the rest of the crew. Some claimed the black ship was cursed, others said it belonged to pirates who had vanished without a trace. One older crew member even muttered something about ghosts, though he quickly fell silent when Laura shot him a glare. Whatever the truth, was everyone agreed on one thing: the ship was bad news. When the boarding party stepped out of the Eclipse and approached the black ship, the feeling of dread only grew stronger. Up close, the vessel looked even worse than it had from afar. Its surface was pitted and scarred, as if it had survived countless battles, or perhaps something worse. Strange symbols were etched into the metal in places, though none of them matched any language anyone recognized. "This doesn't look safe," Chloe murmured under her breath as they reached the airlock. She glanced at Daniel, who gave her a reassuring nod. "We'll be careful," he said. "Just stick close and don't touch anything unless I say so." The airlock hissed open with surprising ease, revealing a dark corridor beyond. The team hesitated for a moment, their flashlights cutting through the gloom. The walls were covered in thick layers of dust, and the floor creaked ominously beneath their boots. It smelled musty, like the air hadn't moved in years. "Stay alert," Laura's voice crackled over their comms. "Report back every 5 minutes." Daniel led the way, his flashlight sweeping left and right. Every few steps, he stopped to examine something: a panel, a door, a piece of debris, but everything seemed dead. There was no power running through the ship, no hum of machinery or flicker of lights. It was completely silent, save for the sound of their breathing and the occasional groan of metal shifting somewhere in the distance. Chloe stayed close behind him, her own flashlight trembling slightly in her hand. She couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The shadows seemed to stretch longer than they should, and every time she turned her head, she thought she saw movement out of the corner of her eye. "Did you hear that?" she whispered suddenly, freezing in place. "Hear what?" Daniel asked, turning to look at her. "I thought I heard Footsteps. They both listened carefully, but there was nothing. Just silence. Daniel shook his head. Probably just the ship settling. These old wrecks make weird noises sometimes. But Chloe wasn't convinced. She kept glancing over her shoulder, half expecting to see someone, or something, lurking in the darkness. She wanted to ask Daniel if he felt it too, that oppressive weight pressing down on them, but she didn't want to seem scared. Not in front of him. After what felt like hours, they finally found something interesting. A small room filled with dusty equipment and papers scattered across the floor. In the center of the room was a desk, its surface covered in faded writing and diagrams. Daniel knelt down to examine it, brushing away the dust with his gloved hand. It looks like a logbook, he said, flipping through the pages. Someone named Veronica Kane wrote this. Looks like she was the captain of this ship. Chloe leaned over his shoulder to get a better look. The handwriting was shaky, almost frantic, and the entries were filled with anger and despair. Veronica talked about betrayal, about being abandoned by her crew. She mentioned experiments gone wrong and secrets too dangerous to share. The last entry was particularly chilling. They will pay for what they've done. All of them. Who's they? Chloe asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Daniel shrugged. No idea. But whatever happened here, it wasn't good. As they continued reading, the temperature in the room seemed to drop. Chloe shivered, pulling her jacket tighter around her. Do you feel that? She asked. Yeah, Daniel replied, standing up. Let's keep moving. We've got enough to report back already. But as they turned to leave, the door slammed shut behind them. The lights on their helmets flickered, and a low, guttural growl echoed through the room. For the first time since stepping aboard the black ship, they realized they weren't alone. The room was plunged into darkness as the flickering lights on their helmets gave out one by one. Chloe's breath quickened, and she instinctively reached for Daniel's arm, her fingers gripping his sleeve tightly. The growl grew louder, reverberating through the walls like some unseen beast was circling them. Stay calm, Daniel said, though his voice betrayed a hint of unease. He fumbled with his utility belt, pulling out a small emergency flashlight. Its beam cut through the pitch-black space, revealing the cramped room they were trapped in. The scattered papers danced in the light as if stirred by an invisible breeze. We need to find another way out. Chloe nodded but didn't let go of his arm. She glanced over her shoulder, half expecting something to leap out of the shadows. At any moment, her mind raced with questions. What had made that sound? Was it some kind of animal? Or worse, something else entirely? Daniel moved toward the door, examining its edges. It was sealed shut, refusing to budge no matter how hard he pushed or pulled. He cursed under his breath and tried accessing the control panel beside it, but there was no power running to it. This isn't going to work, he muttered. We'll have to find another exit. There's a vent, Chloe whispered, pointing to a metal grate near the ceiling. Her voice trembled slightly, but she forced herself to focus. If we can get up there, maybe we can crawl through. Daniel followed her gaze and nodded. Good idea. Help me boost you up. Together, they dragged a chair from the corner of the room and positioned it beneath the vent. Chloe climbed onto it while Daniel steadied her, shining the flashlight upward so she could see what she was doing. With trembling hands, she pried the grate loose, sending a cascade of rust flakes raining down. Once it was free, she handed it to Daniel and hoisted herself into the narrow duct. It's tight, she said, her voice echoing inside the confined space. But I think I can make it. Go slow, Daniel instructed, climbing up after her. And call out if you see anything. The air inside the vent was stale and cold, carrying a faint metallic tang that made Chloe's stomach churn. She crawled forward cautiously, her flashlight casting long, distorted shadows ahead of her. Behind her, Daniel grunted as he squeezed through the tight passage, his larger frame making movement more difficult. After several minutes of crawling, they reached a junction where the vent split off in two directions. Chloe paused, unsure which way to go. Both paths looked identical, dark, claustrophobic and utterly uninviting. "Which one?" Daniel asked, his voice strained from the effort of keeping up. "I don't know," Chloe admitted. "Maybe we should flip a coin." Before Daniel could respond, a loud clang echoed through the vents, startling them both. It sounded like something, or someone, had struck the metal wall just a few feet away. Chloe froze, her heart pounding in her chest. "Did you hear that?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Yes," Daniel replied grimly. "Let's keep moving, quickly." They chose the left path and continued crawling, their movements hurried now. The clang came again, closer this time, followed by a low scraping noise that sent shivers down Chloe's spine. Whatever was following them was gaining ground. Ahead, Chloe spotted a faint glimmer of light filtering through another vent cover. Relief washed over her as she realized it might lead outside the ship, or at least somewhere less suffocating. She scrambled toward it, her knees protesting against the rough metal surface. When she finally reached the vent cover, she pushed it open carefully, peering out into the corridor beyond. It was dimly lit, the faint green glow of emergency lighting, casting long shadows along the walls. The hallway stretched in both directions, empty and eerily silent. "It looks clear," she whispered, dropping down into the corridor. Daniel followed shortly after, landing with a soft thud. They both took a moment to catch their breath, leaning against the cool metal walls. "We need to figure out where we are," Daniel said, pulling out a small map display from his pocket. It was a basic layout of the ship they had pieced together, earlier based on scans from the eclipse. He studied it intently, tracing their likely position with his finger. "If we head this way, we should reach the main engineering bay. There might still be power there." Chloe nodded, though she couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Every shadow seemed to shift when she wasn't looking, and the silence was oppressive, pressing down on her like a weight. She kept her flashlight trained ahead, scanning the corridor for any signs of movement. As they walked, the ship seemed to change around them. Hallways that should have been straight began to curve unexpectedly, and doors they passed appeared warped, as if the very structure of the vessel was twisting itself. Chloe pointed this out to Daniel, who frowned but didn't offer an explanation. "This place is messing with us," he said finally. "Don't trust anything you see." They pressed on, their footsteps echoing loudly in the deserted corridors. At one point, Chloe thought she saw a figure standing at the far end of the hall, a woman in tattered clothing, her face obscured by long dark hair. But when she blinked, the figure was gone. "Did you see that?" she asked, stopping abruptly. "See? What?" Daniel replied, turning to look. "There was someone, or something." Her voice trailed off as she realized how ridiculous it sounded. She shook her head. "Never mind. Let's just keep going." But the sightings didn't stop. There, as they neared the engineering bay, strange shapes began to form in the corners of their vision. Shadowy figures darting just out of sight, whispers brushing past their ears. Chloe started to feel lightheaded, as if the air itself was growing thinner. Then without warning, the lights flickered back on. The sudden brightness was almost blinding, forcing them to shield their eyes. When they adjusted, they found themselves standing in front of a massive set of double doors labeled Engineering. The door slid open automatically, revealing a cavernous chamber filled with dormant machinery and sparking conduits. "Finally," Daniel breathed, stepping inside. "Now we can—" His words were cut short as a deafening screech filled the room. Overhead, the lights pulsed erratically, casting strobe-like flashes across the space. Shadows writhed and contorted, taking on grotesque forms that seemed to writhe independently of the objects casting them. Chloe stumbled backward, her flashlight slipping from her grasp and clattering to the floor. "What's happening?" she shouted over the noise. "I don't know," Daniel yelled back, grabbing her arm and pulling her toward a nearby console. "But we need to get out of here." He frantically tapped at the controls, attempting to restore power to the ship's systems. Sparks flew from the console as he worked, singeing his gloves and leaving black marks on his hands. Chloe stood beside him, clutching the edge of the console for support as the world around them spiraled into chaos. Suddenly, the screeching stopped, The light stabilized, bathing the room in an eerie red glow. For a brief moment, everything was still. Then, a voice spoke. Not from the speakers, but directly inside their heads. "You shouldn't have come here," Chloe gasped, clutching her temples as the voice resonated through her skull. It was feminine, yet twisted with rage and sorrow. Daniel staggered, clutching his own head as if trying to block it out. "Who's there?" he demanded, his voice shaking. A figure materialized before them, a woman cloaked in darkness, her features indistinct but undeniably human. Her eyes burned with an otherworldly intensity, pinning them in place. "I am Veronica Kane," the apparition declared, her voice dripping with malice. "And you are trespassing in my domain." Neither Chloe nor Daniel could move. They were frozen, captives of her gaze. Veronica stepped closer, her form shifting and wavering like smoke. "You seek answers," she continued, "but not all truths are meant to be uncovered. Leave now, or face the consequences." Before either of them could respond, the room erupted into chaos once more. Machinery roared to life, spitting sparks and emitting ear-splitting alarms. Veronica vanished, leaving behind only the oppressive weight of her presence. "Run!" Daniel shouted, grabbing Chloe's hand and dragging her toward the exit. They fled the engineering bay, the ship itself seeming to rebel against their escape. Floors buckled beneath their feet, and walls groaned as if alive. Behind them, the same guttural growl from earlier echoed through the halls, growing louder with each passing second. Chloe's lungs burned as she sprinted alongside Daniel, her legs threatening to give out. She didn't dare look back, afraid of what she might see. All she knew was that they had to get off this ship, no matter the cost. As they rounded a corner, they skidded to a halt. Blocking their path was a massive, hulking shape. Too large to be human, its silhouette jagged and misshapen. It loomed over them, pulsating with an unnatural energy that made the air crackle. "Oh no," Chloe whispered, her voice trembling. Daniel tightened his grip on her hand. "We're not done yet," he said firmly. "Not until we're off this damn ship." With renewed determination, they veered off in another direction, searching desperately for a way out. The black ship wasn't about to let them go quietly, but neither were they ready to surrender. Chloe and Daniel sprinted down the twisting corridors of the black ship, their footsteps echoing wildly as they tried to put distance between themselves and the monstrous shape that had blocked their path. The air was thick with tension, and every breath felt like it carried a piece of the ship's oppressive weight. Behind them, the growling grew louder, reverberating through the walls as if the entire vessel were alive and angry. "We need to find another route," Daniel shouted over his shoulder, his voice strained from exertion. He glanced back briefly, his flashlight beam catching glimpses of the shadowy figure lumbering after them. It moved unnaturally fast for something so large, its jagged limbs swinging with jerky, unnatural motions. "There's a door up ahead," Chloe called out, pointing toward a narrow passageway that branched off to the right. She didn't wait for Daniel's response. She darted into the opening, her heart pounding in her chest. The corridor was cramped and lined with exposed wires that sparked dangerously. Sparks singed her sleeve as she brushed past. But she didn't stop, not even when she heard the low groan of metal behind her. Daniel followed close behind, his eyes scanning the area for anything they could use to slow down their pursuer. His gaze landed on a control panel mounted on the wall, partially hidden behind a tangle of cables. "Chloe, keep going," he yelled, skidding to a halt. "I'll try to seal this section off." Chloe hesitated, torn between staying with him and obeying his order. But the sound of heavy footfalls growing closer made the decision for her. She nodded quickly and ran farther down the hallway, clutching her flashlight like a lifeline. As she rounded a corner, she risked a glance back just in time to see Daniel slamming his fist against the panel. Lights flashed erratically, and a metallic screech filled the air as a bulkhead door began to descend from the ceiling. The hulking creature roared in frustration, lunging forward with surprising speed. For a moment it seemed like it would crash through before the door sealed completely, but at the last second the barrier slammed shut, cutting off its advance. On the other side, muffled thuds and snarls echoed as the creature pounded against the metal. "Daniel!" Chloe shouted, relief flooding her voice. She turned back toward him only to realize he wasn't alone. Standing a few feet away was Veronica Kane, or what remained of her. Her spectral form shimmered faintly in the dim light, her hollow eyes locking onto Chloe with an intensity that made her skin crawl. "You cannot escape," Veronica said, her voice cold and hollow. It wasn't loud, but it carried a weight that silenced everything else around them. "This ship is my prison, and you are now part of it." Chloe backed away instinctively, her flashlight trembling in her hand. "We're not staying here," she stammered, trying to sound braver than she felt. "We're leaving." Veronica tilted her head slightly, almost amused. "Leaving? You think it's that simple? Do you know why I remain here? Why this ship refuses to die?" She gestured toward the walls, which seemed to pulse faintly as if responding to her words. "It holds secrets too dangerous for the living to uncover. Secrets that will destroy you if you persist." Daniel stepped forward, placing himself between Chloe and the ghostly figure. "We don't care about your secrets," he said firmly. "We're just trying to survive." Veronica's expression darkened and the temperature in the corridor dropped sharply. Frost began to creep along the walls, spreading outward from where she stood. "Survive?" she repeated, her tone dripping with disdain. "You are already dead. You simply haven't accepted it yet." Before either of them could respond, the floor beneath their feet shuddered violently. A deep rumble echoed through the ship, shaking loose debris from the ceiling. Veronica vanished in a swirl of shadows, leaving them alone once more. But the sense of dread lingered, heavier than ever. "What was that?" Chloe asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know," Daniel replied, glancing around, nervously. "But we need to move. Now." They hurried down the corridor, searching for any sign of a way out. The ship seemed determined to thwart them at every turn. Doors that should have opened refused to budge, while others led to dead ends, or spiraled back into areas they'd already passed through. It was as if the vessel itself was alive, rearranging its layout to trap them. At one point they stumbled upon a room filled with strange equipment, machines unlike anything they'd seen before. Some looked like medical devices, while others resembled communication arrays, though their purpose was unclear. In the center of the room was a large console covered in blinking lights and cryptic symbols. Despite the chaos surrounding them, Daniel couldn't resist the urge to investigate. "This might be important," he muttered, running his fingers over the controls. "If we can figure out what these machines do, maybe we can—" "Daniel." "Focus," Chloe snapped, her patience wearing thin. "We don't have time for this. That thing is still out there, and who knows how long that bulkhead will hold." Reluctantly, Daniel pulled away from the console and rejoined her. They exited the room, retracing their steps until they found themselves back near the engineering bay. The red emergency lighting still bathed the area in an ominous glow, casting long shadows that danced eerily across the walls. As they approached the main entrance, Chloe noticed something strange. A faint outline etched into the floor, forming a perfect circle. At first she thought it might be some kind of maintenance hatch, but as she knelt down to examine it more closely, she realized it was deeper than it appeared. Tiny cracks radiated outward from the edges, glowing faintly with an otherworldly blue light. "What is that?" Daniel asked, crouching beside her. "I don't know," Chloe admitted, tracing the outline with her finger. The surface was smooth and cool to the touch, almost glass-like. "But it feels wrong." Before they could decide what to do next, the ground quaked again, harder this time. The glowing cracks widened, pulsing with increasing intensity. A low hum filled the air, growing louder by the second. Chloe scrambled backward, her instincts screaming at her to get away. "Something's happening," she shouted, grabbing Daniel's arm and pulling him toward the exit. But it was too late. The circle erupted in a blinding flash of light, sending shockwaves rippling through the room. Both of them were thrown off their feet, landing hard on the metal floor. When the light faded, they blinked dazedly, struggling to regain their bearings. Standing in the center of the glowing circle was Veronica, her form more solid than before. Her eyes burned with an unholy fire, and her voice boomed like thunder. "You fools," she spat, stepping out of the circle. "You've awakened the rift." "The rift?" Daniel echoed, struggling to his feet. "What are you talking about?" Veronica ignored him, turning her attention to the glowing circle. This ship was never meant to exist in one reality. Its creators sought to bridge worlds, to tear open the fabric of existence itself. But they failed. And now, because of you, the barriers are weakening. Chloe stared at the circle, her mind racing. "That's what the experiments were for," she murmured, remembering the logbook entries they'd read earlier. They were trying to create portals to other dimensions. "Yes," Veronica confirmed, her tone bitter. "And when the experiments went wrong, the crew abandoned me, left me to die aboard this cursed vessel trapped between worlds." She turned her gaze back to them, her expression softening slightly, but only for a moment. "Now you share my fate." The room shook violently again, and the glowing circle expanded, tendrils of energy snaking outward like grasping hands. Shadows poured from the rift, coalescing into grotesque shapes that loomed menacingly over them. "We need to shut it down," Daniel yelled, stumbling toward the console. "There has to be a way." Veronica laughed, a cold, hollow sound that sent chills down their spines. "You cannot undo what has been done. The rift feeds on fear, on despair. It will consume you, just as it consumed me." Chloe clenched her fists, determination overriding her terror. "No," she said firmly, surprising even herself. "We're not giving up. Not yet." With renewed resolve, she joined Daniel at the console, helping him decipher the controls despite the chaos unfolding around them. The shadows closed in, their twisted forms reaching out hungrily. But Chloe refused to look away, focusing all her attention on finding a solution. For the first time since boarding the black ship, she felt a spark of hope. They weren't powerless, not yet. If they could just hold on a little longer, maybe, just maybe, they could find a way to fight back. Daniel and Chloe worked frantically at the console, their fingers flying over unfamiliar buttons and switches. The glowing circle in the center of the room continued to pulse with increasing intensity, its tendrils of energy spreading like cracks across glass. Shadows swirled around them, taking on monstrous shapes that loomed closer with every passing second. The air was thick with tension, and the hum of the rift drowned out all other sounds. "We're running out of time," Chloe shouted, her voice trembling as she glanced over her shoulder. One of the shadowy figures reached out, its claw-like hand brushing against her arm. She flinched but forced herself to focus. "What are you doing?" "I'm trying to reroute power," Daniel replied through gritted teeth. His hands moved quickly, his mind racing to make sense of the alien controls. "If I can overload the system, maybe we can collapse the rift." "And what happens to us if it collapses?" Chloe asked, her eyes wide with fear. Daniel hesitated, for a split second before answering. "We'll deal with that when it comes. Right now, this is our only shot." Chloe swallowed hard but nodded. She trusted him, even if the plan sounded insane. Together, they poured all their energy into the task, fighting against both the ship's resistance and the growing chaos around them. The shadows were becoming more aggressive, lashing out with greater speed and ferocity. One of them knocked Chloe off balance, sending her sprawling to the floor. She cried out in pain as her elbow connected sharply with the metal surface, but she scrambled back to her feet almost immediately. There was no time to rest, no room for weakness. "Keep going," Daniel urged, his voice strained. Beads of sweat trickled down his forehead as he worked tirelessly, his movements precise despite the mounting pressure. He could feel the console heating up beneath his hands, the machine straining under the sudden surge of power he was forcing through it. Suddenly, the lights flickered, and the entire room shuddered violently. The glowing circle expanded further, its edges beginning to crackle with electricity. A deafening roar filled the space, shaking the very foundation of the ship. It felt like the vessel itself was screaming in agony, or perhaps warning. Veronica reappeared near the rift, her form shimmering faintly as though caught between worlds. Her expression was unreadable, a mixture of anger and something else. Sadness, perhaps? Regret? "You cannot stop what has already begun," she said, her voice echoing eerily. "This ship is a tomb, and you will join me in eternity." "No," Chloe snapped, surprising even herself with the strength in her voice. "We're not staying here. Not like you did." Veronica's gaze shifted to her, and for a moment, there was a flicker of emotion in her otherwise hollow eyes. "You think you're brave?" she asked softly, almost mockingly. "Bravery won't save you from what lies beyond." Chloe didn't respond. Instead, she turned her attention back to the console, determined to prove Veronica wrong. If bravery wasn't enough, then logic would have to do. She studied the symbols carefully, piecing together patterns based on earlier observations. "Try reversing the polarity on this panel," she instructed Daniel, pointing to a specific section. "It might stabilize the overload long enough for us to escape." Daniel followed her suggestion without hesitation, trusting her judgment. As he adjusted the settings, the hum of the rift began to change pitch, growing higher and more unstable. The shadows writhed furiously as if sensing their impending destruction. "It's working," Daniel exclaimed, a note of triumph in his voice. But his relief was short-lived. With a loud bang, one of the conduits exploded, sending sparks flying in all directions. Chloe ducked instinctively, shielding her face with her arms. Smoke filled the air, stinging their eyes and making it harder to breathe. The rift pulsed erratically, its light flickering between blue and crimson. The ground beneath their feet buckled, throwing them off balance. Daniel grabbed onto the edge of the console to steady himself, while Chloe clung to a nearby railing. "We need to finish this now," Chloe yelled, her voice barely audible over the cacophony of noise. "Before it tears the whole ship apart." Daniel nodded, his jaw set with determination. He flipped another switch, then slammed his palm down on a large red button marked with a symbol neither of them recognized. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a deafening crack, the console erupted in a shower of sparks, and the glow of the rift dimmed slightly. "It's starting to close," Chloe shouted, her heart pounding with hope. But just as quickly, the shadows surged forward, desperate to prevent their escape. They lunged at the pair, their forms twisting and contorting into grotesque shapes that seemed to defy reality itself. "Hold them off," Daniel ordered, his voice urgent. "I need a few more seconds." Chloe grabbed a piece of debris from the floor, a jagged shard of metal, and wielded it like a weapon. She swung wildly at the nearest shadow, striking it with surprising force. To her astonishment, the creature recoiled, dissolving momentarily before reforming. Emboldened by the small victory, she pressed on, using whatever makeshift tools she could find to fend off the relentless assault. Meanwhile, Daniel focused all his efforts on stabilizing the overload sequence. His hands trembled as he entered the final commands, knowing that failure would mean certain death for them and possibly countless others. The console sparked violently, threatening to overload entirely, but he refused to give up. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the rift began to shrink. Its glow dimmed significantly, and the oppressive weight in the air lifted ever so slightly. The shadows shrieked in fury, their forms dissipating as the energy sustaining them faded away. "It's working," Daniel called out, his voice hoarse, but triumphant. "Get ready to run." Chloe didn't need to be told twice. She backed away from the diminishing rift, keeping her makeshift weapon raised until the last shadow vanished completely. Then, without wasting another second, she bolted toward the exit, Daniel close behind her. They sprinted through the corridors, retracing their steps as best they could. The ship groaned and shuddered around them, its structure weakening under the strain of the collapsing rift. Panels fell from the ceiling, and wires sparked dangerously, but they pushed forward, driven by sheer adrenaline. As they neared the airlock where they had first entered the black ship, Chloe spotted something ahead, a figure standing motionless in the doorway. At first she thought it was Veronica, come to deliver one final act of vengeance, but as they drew closer she realized it wasn't the ghostly apparition, It was Captain Laura Hayes, accompanied by several members of the boarding. "Party, Captain," Chloe cried out, relief flooding her voice. "We need to leave. Now!" Laura's expression was grim as she ushered them aboard the Eclipse. "What did you do?" she demanded, her tone sharp, but tinged with concern. "There's no time to explain," Daniel shouted, pulling Chloe inside. "Just get us out of here." Without waiting for further questions, Laura gave the order to disengage. The Eclipse detached from the black ship with a loud hiss, its engines roaring to life as it accelerated away. Through the viewport, they watched as the black ship grew smaller and smaller, its ominous silhouette fading into the void. Then, with a blinding flash of light, the vessel imploded, consumed by the collapsing rift. The shockwave rippled outward, buffeting the Eclipse and causing alarms to blare throughout the cruiser. Everyone braced themselves as the ship rocked violently, but moments later, the turbulence subsided, leaving only silence in its wake. For a long while, no one spoke. The crew stared at the empty space where the black ship had once been, their faces pale with shock and exhaustion. Chloe sank into a nearby chair, her legs finally giving out beneath her. Daniel leaned against the wall, his chest heaving as he struggled to catch his breath. "What was that?" Laura asked, eventually breaking the silence. "It was a prison," Chloe replied quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "And we were lucky to escape." Daniel nodded in agreement, his expression somber. "But I don't think we've seen the last of it." Laura frowned but didn't press further. Whatever had happened aboard the black ship, it was clear that none of them would forget it anytime soon. As the Eclipse drifted farther away from the wreckage, the crew tried to shake off the lingering sense of dread. But deep down, they knew the horrors of the black ship would haunt them forever, and somewhere in the vast emptiness of space a faint whisper echoed, "You cannot escape me." The Eclipse drifted through the cold expanse of space, its engines humming softly as it carried its shaken crew further away from the wreckage they had left behind. The black ship was gone now, obliterated in a blinding flash, but the memory of it lingered like a shadow over everyone aboard. No one spoke much. The weight of what had happened pressed heavily on their shoulders. Even Captain Laura Hayes, usually calm and composed, seemed lost in thought, her gaze fixed on the empty void outside the viewport. Chloe sat slumped in a chair near the back of the bridge, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched a cup of lukewarm coffee. She hadn't realized how cold she felt until someone handed it to her, though the warmth did little to ease the chill that had settled deep in her bones. Her mind replayed every moment aboard the black ship, the growls, the shadows, Veronica's haunting voice, and she couldn't shake the feeling that something was still wrong. Daniel stood nearby, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed. His face was pale, his sharp features etched with exhaustion, but his eyes remained alert, scanning the room as if expecting trouble to break out at any moment. He glanced at Chloe occasionally, concern flickering across his expression each time he noticed her staring blankly into space. "You okay?" he asked finally, breaking the silence. Chloe blinked, startled by his voice. "I don't know," she admitted after a pause. "Do you think we really stopped it? Or did we just delay whatever was coming?" Daniel hesitated before answering. "We destroyed the rift, or at least, I think we did. That should have been enough to seal Veronica and those things inside. But what if it wasn't?" Chloe pressed, her voice barely above a whisper. "What if there's more out there? What if we didn't finish it?" Before Daniel could respond, Laura stepped forward, her presence commanding attention. "Listen up," she said firmly, addressing the entire crew. "We've been through something none of us will ever forget, but we made it out alive. That matters. Right now our priority is to get back to base and report what happened. After that, we'll figure out what comes next." Her words were meant to reassure them, but they only served as a reminder of how much uncertainty still loomed ahead. None of them knew whether the black ship truly posed a threat anymore, or if its destruction had unleashed something worse. Later, that evening, Chloe found herself unable to sleep. She wandered through the quiet corridors of the eclipse, her footsteps echoing softly against the metal walls. Most of the crew had retreated to their quarters, seeking rest after the harrowing ordeal. But Chloe couldn't bring herself to lie down. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Veronica's burning gaze, or heard the guttural growl of the creatures that had chased them. She ended up in the observation deck, a small room with a wide window that offered an unobstructed view of the stars. It was peaceful here, away from the tension on the bridge, and for a moment she allowed herself to breathe deeply, trying to clear her mind. The vastness of space stretched out before her, infinite and indifferent and yet somehow comforting in its constancy. "Couldn't sleep either?" a voice asked from behind her. Chloe turned to see Daniel standing in the doorway, his silhouette framed by the dim light of the corridor. She nodded. "Too much going on in my head," she admitted. "You?" "Same," he replied, stepping inside and joining her by the window. For a while, neither of them spoke. They simply stood there, watching the stars drift lazily past. Finally, Daniel broke the silence. "Do you think Veronica was telling the truth? About being betrayed by her crew?" Chloe shrugged. "It's hard to say. She was angry, desperate. People do strange things when they're backed into a corner." She paused, then added, "But I believe she thought she was doing the right thing, at least at first." Daniel frowned. "And later? When she became whatever she was?" "That part's harder to explain," Chloe admitted. "Maybe the experiments changed her, or maybe being trapped between worlds drove her mad. Either way, I don't think she started out wanting revenge." They fell silent again, lost in their own thoughts. The hum of the ship's engines filled the quiet moments, steady and reassuring. Yet even here, surrounded by familiar sights and sounds, Chloe couldn't escape the nagging feeling that something was off. "I keep thinking about what she said," Chloe murmured after a while. "About not being able to escape." Daniel glanced at her sharply. "You don't actually believe that, do you?" "I don't know what to believe," she confessed. "But I can't stop thinking about it. What if we didn't destroy the rift completely? What if it's still out there waiting?" Daniel sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "If there's anything left of it, we'll deal with it when the time comes. Until then, we've done everything we can." His words were meant to comfort her, but they didn't quite land. Chloe appreciated the sentiment, but deep down, she knew this wasn't over, not entirely. Still, she forced herself to nod, not wanting to dwell on the possibility any longer. Back on the bridge, Captain Laura Hayes reviewed the data collected during their encounter with the Black Ship. Much of it was fragmented, corrupted by the chaos of the rift, but certain pieces stood out. Symbols, patterns, and fragments of audio logs that hinted at the true nature of the experiments conducted aboard the vessel. As she pieced together the information, a grim picture began to emerge. "Captain?" Ensign Ryan Cole approached cautiously, holding a tablet. "I've finished analyzing the energy readings from the explosion. There's something unusual." Laura raised an eyebrow. "Unusual how?" Ryan hesitated, clearly uneasy. "The energy signature, it's fading, but it hasn't disappeared completely. It's like remnants of the rift are still active, scattered but present." Laura's jaw tightened. This wasn't what she wanted to hear. "Are you saying the rift might reform?" "I don't know for sure," Ryan admitted. "But it's possible. If the energy stabilizes again, it could create new breaches." Laura stared at the tablet, her mind racing. She had hoped destroying the Black Ship would put an end to the threat, but now it seemed they might have only delayed the inevitable. She dismissed Ryan with a curt nod, instructing him to continue monitoring the readings closely. As the ensign left, Laura turned her gaze back to the viewport. The stars twinkled innocently beyond the glass, oblivious to the dangers lurking just beneath the surface of reality. She couldn't shake the feeling that they had opened Pandora's box, and no matter how tightly they tried to seal it, some evils refused to stay contained. The next morning, the crew gathered for a debriefing session. Laura outlined the findings so far, emphasizing the need for caution moving forward. Until we understand exactly what we're dealing with, we operate under the assumption that the threat isn't fully neutralized, she stated firmly. That means heightened security protocols and constant surveillance of nearby sectors. Questions arose immediately, voices overlapping in concern and confusion. Some crew members argued for immediate evacuation of the area, while others suggested sending drones to investigate potential breaches. Laura listened patiently, weighing each suggestion carefully before making her decision. We'll proceed cautiously, she concluded. For now, our primary objective is to return to base and share what we've learned. From there, Command will decide the best course of action. Though the announcement brought a measure of relief, unease lingered among the crew. Everyone knew the risks hadn't disappeared. They'd merely shifted elsewhere, hidden just beyond sight. That night, Chloe lay awake in her bunk, staring at the ceiling. Despite her efforts to distract herself, her thoughts kept circling back to the same question. Had they truly escaped Veronica's wrath, or had they simply postponed it? Just as she began to drift off, a faint sound reached her ears, a low, distant hum that vibrated through the walls of the ship. At first she thought it was the engines, but as she focused on it, she realized it was different, deeper, stranger. Heart pounding, Chloe climbed out of bed and crept into the hallway. The hum grew louder as she moved, guiding her toward the observation deck. When she arrived, she froze in the doorway. Floating in the center of the room was a faint, glowing orb, the same blue hue as the rift they had destroyed. It pulsed gently, casting eerie shadows across the walls. And within the orb, distorted but unmistakable, was Veronica's face. "You cannot escape me," she whispered, her voice echoing eerily in the confined space. Chloe stumbled backward, her breath catching in her throat. Before she could react, the orb vanished, leaving only darkness behind. Shaken, Chloe ran back to her quarters, locking the door behind her. She didn't tell anyone what she had seen, not yet. But as she curled up under the covers, clutching her blanket tightly, one thought echoed relentlessly in her mind. Veronica's shroud of vengeance wasn't done with them. Not yet. The next morning, Chloe woke up feeling more exhausted than when she had gone to bed. Her mind replayed the events of the previous night, the glowing orb, Veronica's haunting whisper, and she couldn't shake the sense that something was watching her. She dressed quietly, avoiding eye contact with her reflection in the mirror as if afraid it might reveal something lurking behind her. When she stepped onto the bridge, the atmosphere was tense. Captain Laura Hayes stood at the center, speaking in hushed tones with Lieutenant Daniel Brooks and a few other senior crew members. The tension in the room was palpable, like an invisible weight pressing down on everyone. Chloe hesitated for a moment before approaching them. "Is everything okay?" she asked cautiously, her voice barely above a whisper. Laura glanced at her, her expression unreadable. "We've picked up unusual readings," she said finally. "Energy spikes similar to what we detected near the black ship." Chloe's stomach dropped. "You think it's connected?" "We don't know yet," Daniel interjected, his tone measured but tinged with unease. "But we're keeping a close watch on it." Before anyone could say more, an alarm blared through the ship, startling everyone. Ensign Ryan Cole rushed to his station, his fingers flying over the controls as he analyzed the incoming data. "Captain, there's a disturbance ahead. A rift opening directly in our path." Laura's jaw tightened. "Helm, adjust course immediately. Engineering, prepare for evasive maneuvers." The crew sprang into action, their movements quick and precise despite the growing panic. The Eclipse veered sharply to avoid the anomaly, but the rift expanded rapidly, its edges crackling with energy. A bright flash illuminated the viewport, followed by a deafening roar that shook the entire vessel. "What's happening?" Chloe shouted, clutching the back of a nearby chair for support. "It's pulling us in," Ryan yelled, his voice trembling. "The gravitational pull is too strong." "Engines at full power," Laura commanded, gripping the railing as the ship shuddered violently. "Counter thrust now." The engines roared in response, but it wasn't enough. The rift continued to grow, swallowing everything in its path. Outside the viewport, Stars stretched and distorted, twisting into impossible shapes as reality itself seemed to unravel. "Brace for impact," Laura ordered, her voice cutting through the chaos. The eclipse lurched forward, dragged inexorably toward the rift. For a brief moment, everything went white, blinding, searing light that burned even through closed eyelids. Then, just as suddenly, the light faded, leaving the crew disoriented and gasping for air. When Chloe opened her eyes, she found herself lying on the floor, her head throbbing painfully. Around her, the rest of the crew struggled to regain their footing, groaning and muttering in confusion. The ship was still intact, but something felt wrong. "Where are we?" Daniel asked, his voice strained as he pulled himself up. No one answered. They all stared out the viewport, their faces pale with shock. Instead of the familiar emptiness of space, they were surrounded by a swirling void of colors, shifting hues of red, blue, and green that pulsed rhythmically, like the heartbeat of some massive, unseen creature. "This isn't possible," Laura whispered, her usual composure cracking. "This can't be real." "It's the rift," Chloe murmured, her voice shaking. "It brought us here." As if in response, the swirling colors coalesced into a shape, a figure standing tall and imposing against the backdrop of chaos. It was Veronica, but not as they had seen her before. Her form was larger, more solid, and radiated an aura of power that made it hard to look directly at her. "You dared to interfere," she said, her voice resonating like thunder. "You sought to destroy my prison and thought you could walk away unscathed." "No," Chloe stammered, stepping forward despite her fear. "We didn't want this. We were trying to stop the experiments, to fix what went wrong." Veronica tilted her head slightly, her expression unreadable. "And yet here you are, intruders in a realm you cannot comprehend." She gestured broadly, encompassing the swirling void around them. "You have trespassed where you do not belong." "We'll leave!" Daniel shouted, desperation creeping into his voice. "Just let us go, and we'll never come back." Veronica's gaze shifted to him, and for a moment her expression softened. "Leave? You believe it is so simple? The fabric of existence has been torn. My vengeance demands retribution, not merely for myself, but for all who suffered because of those experiments." Her words sent a chill through the crew. Chloe realized then that Veronica wasn't just angry. She was consumed by a grief so deep it had twisted her very essence. Whatever humanity she had once possessed was long gone, replaced by a need for justice that knew no bounds. "There has to be another way," Chloe pleaded, surprising even herself with the steadiness of her voice. "You don't have to do this. Revenge won't bring them back, it won't fix anything." For a long moment Veronica said nothing. The swirling void around them slowed, its colors dimming slightly as if responding to her hesitation. Then slowly she lowered her hand. "You speak boldly for someone so small," she said, her tone softer now, but no less menacing. "Perhaps there is truth in your words. But know this. Should you fail to honor your promise, I will not hesitate to finish what I started." With that, the void began to collapse inward, drawing itself into a single point of light. The eclipse shuddered once more as the rift closed completely, depositing them back in normal space. Stars reappeared outside the viewport, steady and familiar, as if nothing had happened. Back on the bridge, the crew sat in stunned silence. No one spoke, no one moved. The ordeal had left them physically and emotionally drained, their minds struggling to process what they had just experienced. "We made it," Daniel said, finally breaking the quiet. His voice was hoarse, but relief was evident in his tone. "For now," Chloe added softly. "But she's still out there, and she's not done with us." Laura nodded grimly. "Then we prepare. Whatever comes next, we face it together." As the eclipse resumed its journey, the crew worked tirelessly to repair the damage and fortify the ship against future threats. But beneath the surface of their determination lay a shared understanding. They had glimpsed something far greater and far darker than they had ever imagined. And somewhere, in the vast expanse of space, Veronica Kane's presence lingered, a reminder that vengeance knows no end.